Welcome, everyone, to the second edition of the Young Academy Conversation Series, as I would like to call it. And today's topic is Speaking Minds, Detecting Neurological Disorders Through Language. It's a very exciting area. Lots of different specialisms working on a similar topic, coming from different perspectives. And we're very glad that we found four people who are equally excited and interested in this conversation. So we're going to start with Dr. Georgiou leading the discussion, and we have three discussants there will be back-to-back talks, and then we'll open up for discussion both within the panel and to the wider audience. So Dr. Georgiou, if you want to take off the discussion, that would be great.
Yes. Thank you so much for this opportunity first to present this project in my talk. And it's my pleasure, of course, to be here. And I would like to thank, apart from the Young Academy of Europe, the Discussant, Ioana, Valantis, and Kevin. So, as Anna said, the title of this talk is Speaking Minds, Detecting Neurological Disorders Through Language. Before I start with the project, I would like to introduce myself. I'm an assistant. I'm Georgios, or Georgiou. I'm an assistant professor in linguistics at the University of Nicosia. I'm the associate head of the Department of Languages and Literature, and I'm the director of the university's phonetic lab. And a few things about my general academic profile, some honors I received in the last few years. For example, in 2023, I was honored with the Cyprus Research Award, Young Researcher in the field of humanities and social sciences by the Research and Innovation Foundation of Cyprus. And last year, I was elected Fellow of the Young Academy of Europe. Now, about my research background, my research interests mainly involve speech acquisition and language acquisition, with a focus on second languages. And I'm also interested in communication disorders and the application of machine learning in linguistic studies. And more specifically, I use quantitative methods and computational approaches, such as machine learning, to model speech and language acquisition and identify biomarkers for communication affecting conditions. Please keep this word biomarkers.
Bună ziua, îmi pare rău. Am o problemă personală cu urgentă.
Okay. So please keep this word biomarkers. So what is a biomarker? Biomarker is a measurable speech or language feature that reflects underlying neurological or cognitive changes, which are often used to detect or monitor disorders. So we call it a biomarker because it marks or indicates a biological process, even if it's not directly a biological substance. So changes in speech may reflect neural changes, especially in diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson. We'll tell more things about biomarkers. I will give more examples in the next slides. And I aim to optimize learning outcomes in second language acquisition and develop prognostic and diagnostic tools based on speech and language features for the detection of communication disorders. I was involved in several projects in the last few years pertaining to pathological populations and more specifically children with developmental language disorders. So here you can see a recent publication in the Journal of Neurolinguistics in which my colleague and I investigated the discrimination of voicing as a diagnostic marker of developmental language disorder. So actually what we did, we compared populations with PLD with populations with typical development to see if their ability to discriminate voicing versus voiceless consonants like th, d, s, z could serve as a biomarker of DLD. So as you can see the graph, we found significant differences between younger and older individuals, but also significant differences between younger individuals and with DLD and younger individuals with typical development. So in other words, typical developing individuals were able to discriminate these consonants better than populations with DLD. This actually means that voicing can serve as a biomarker for developmental language disorder. We also investigated in this study how different factors like age, nonverbal intelligence, vocabulary, morphosyntax, and sentence repetition correlate with the ability of speakers or participants to discriminate these consonants. And we ranked these variables. The first one was age, followed by sentence repetition, and then nonverbal IQ for children with developmental language disorder. Another relevant paper in which we investigated speech rate of children with DLD in an Arabic context. We wanted to check whether speech rate was a biomarker of DLD. When we say speech rate, we mean the ability of children to produce more specifically syllables per second in their speech. So we measure how many syllables they produce in their speech, excluding pauses. And we found that children with DLD had lower SPS, syllables per second, compared to typical developing children, in both the old and the young groups. So this research also says that speech rate can serve as a biomarker of developmental language disorder. And talking about machine learning and technology, we have a recent publication in the Journal of Technology and Behavioral Science, which uses a neural network model to investigate its ability to identify developmental language disorder. In table 2, you can see various metrics. Various metrics are used to find out the accuracy of the model. You can see relatively high metrics, high values in all metrics like accuracy, precision, recall, F1 score, and ROC curve. So this means that the model can identify and classify individuals with developmental language disorder, typical developing individuals with high accuracy. But sometimes it's very useful to investigate the role of different variables in identifying the disorder. So the variables we used had to do with morphosyntax, vocabulary, repetition, sentence repetition, perception, speech perception, more specifically perception of consonants, and reaction times perception. As you can see from the picture that I showed here, morphosyntax was more important than vocabulary, and repetition were more important in classifying children with developmental language disorder compared to speech perception and reaction times in speech perception. So it's like we rank the variables based on their importance. Okay, so I presented some research which has to do with my research interests and my previous publications on pathological populations, and more specifically children with developmental language disorder. And generally, we can say that language and speech features can serve as biomarkers for neurological disorders. There are many published studies in the literature which show the importance of such features in identifying various neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, mild cognitive impairment, and many, many others. Also, there is a lot of research on the role of machine learning for the detection of neurological disorders based on language and speech features. This research is growing in the last few years and shows the potential of artificial intelligence, and more specifically machine learning, in identifying such disorders or diseases. Some common trends found in the literature about the role of machine learning in identification of disorders, neurological disorders. Most of the studies use single data modalities for detection via statistics or machine learning. So, for example, the majority of study uses linguistic features to see if they can identify a disorder. Or they may use cognitive data or neurological data. But the combination of this data is rarer. So we don't find many studies that compare a lot of modalities. Another trend is the use of deep learning for the detection of speech and language biomarkers. So when we say deep learning, we mean more sophisticated models that can identify more complex relationships between the variables. And based on the literature, such models have the potential to identify better differences between two or more populations, and therefore the use of deep learning models is on the rise in the last few years. And the emphasis is on identifying biomarkers that can detect neurological disorders at their earliest stages. So this is very important. So we need biomarkers that can identify these disorders at an early stage, so that there'll be the relevant intervention in order to stop the progression of these disorders. Some important parameters that need to be considered for future research. We need to investigate to a greater extent under-researched populations. So these may include groups which are often marginalized or excluded, like rural communities, ethnic minorities, or low-income groups, or even individuals with rare disorders. Another important parameter is the investigation of bilingual populations. So we need to consider the linguistic background of the participants, because bilingualism can mask or reveal symptoms differently, especially in disorders like Alzheimer's disease or aphasia. And machine learning models must account for language-related variability to avoid false negatives or positives. And this may lead to misdiagnosis or ineffective monitoring. And the other parameter is cross-linguistic research for the identification of universal biomarkers. So we need to know which biomarkers are universal or can be found in many languages. so that we can create more generalizable models that can be applied in several languages. So the detection of universal biomarkers is important as well. Another thing is explainable AI. What is explainable AI? So most of the times machine learning models are lack the interpretation needed. So clinicians, so these models may work as black box models. This means that they don't provide interpretation of the findings. One form of interpretation would be the quantification of how much of how each input feature contributes to a prediction, like I showed before through the variable importance analysis. So it's important to know how much each variable contributes to the prediction of the model. Another important parameter is longitudinal data, so data collected from the same individuals over time in order to capture disease progression. This will enable early detection, more accurate forecasting, and personalized treatment plans by tracking subtle changes. So sometimes it's not very useful to investigate the whole population. I mean, to provide means. It's more useful to investigate a specific person over time. Another useful thing is the comparison of various machine learning models, because we know that different models behave differently. They provide different predictions. And lastly, the combination of multiple data sources is also important. Like we may combine different modalities like fMRI, EEG, language and speech data, and other data. Some final considerations. We must be cautious with data because outcomes depend on data quality. So this may lead to errors, gaps, or biases, especially for underrepresented groups, and the results can be misleading. And the configuration, interpretation, validating the models needs specialized skills because some researchers may not be able to participate. So understanding machine learning is key to ethical and reliable clinical use. And finally, machine learning tools could serve as a complementary resource together with traditional assessment methods. So the aim, at least at this stage, is not to completely replace other methods, but to work synergically with them to provide more accurate predictions for the detection of a disorder. So thank you very much. This was my presentation.
Thank you, George. That was fascinating, but it also highlighted the sort of the enormity of the gaps that we have in knowledge, and the enormity in the gaps in technology as well. So there definitely seems like huge opportunities here. So I'll now invite Dr. Fyndanis to carry on this discussion.
Okay, now you can hear me, right? Now I'm wondering, should I use my PDF or PowerPoint? Because I don't know if you have any recommendation. Sometimes I will try with let me check something if I can. For some reason, I cannot change the slides.
We can see your PDF quite clearly now. It's working quite well, but you're having problems switching through the slide deck?
Exactly. Let me try this one, the PowerPoint. Okay.
That's working.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this interesting and important event. My name is Valantis Fyndanis. I'm an assistant professor of psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics. in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences at Cyprus University of Technology, which is based predominantly in Limassol. I'm also a fellow of the Young Academy of Europe, which I joined in 2021. My work centers around 3 lines of research: morphosyntactic narrative production in aphasia and related acquired adult neurogenic disorders, relationship between morphosyntactic production and cognitive capacities, relationship between bilingualism or multilingualism and cognitive abilities. Today, I will focus on the first line of research, as my expertise in morphosyntactic and narrative production in acquired neurogenic disorders complements Dr. Georgiou's expertise in phonetics, developmental language disorder, and machine learning. As far as morphosyntactic production is concerned, I have extensively examined verb-related morphosyntactic categories, such as time reference and grammatical aspect. And we know that these categories are prone to impairment in different neurological conditions, such as post-stroke aphasia, dementia of the Alzheimer type, multiple sclerosis, even in healthy aging, even in healthy older people. So let me briefly provide some background information on time reference and grammatical aspect. Time reference is related to tense. So when we refer to the past, for instance, when we say, yesterday Mary walked to work, the event time precedes the speaking time, okay? When we refer to the present, so when we say, for example, Mary is walking to work, the event time coincides with the speaking time. When we refer to the future, so when we say tomorrow Mary will walk to work, the event time follows the speaking time. So as you observe here, these, reference to different time frames is made by either temporal adverbial, such as yesterday and tomorrow, or through verb forms, verb morphology. So the difference, so the verb forms you saw before, walked, is walking, will walk, constitute different tenses, so they refer to different time frames. And what is grammatical aspect? I'm sure you're less familiar with aspect. This morphosyntactic or morphosemantic category refers to the way we view an event. So the main fundamental aspectual distinction is that between perfectivity and imperfectivity. A speaker uses the perfective aspect when they view an event as a whole, without focusing on the individual phases that compose it. And the speaker uses the imperfective aspect when focusing on the internal structure of an event. Compare these two sentences. Yesterday, I was singing the song New York, New York when Mary gave me a ring. Yesterday, I sang the song New York, New York. So the difference in the way the singing event is seen in these two sentences reflects the aspectual distinction between imperfectivity and perfectivity, respectively. This line of research has been generously funded by the Research Council of Norway, which I was awarded a large grant in 2019, and the title was Morphosyntactic Production in, just a moment, I have a problem with, morphosyntactic production in stroke-induced agrammatic aphasia, a cross-linguistic machine learning approach. I contacted this research at the University of Oslo. I also got a Marie Curie intra-European, I was awarded a Marie Curie intra-European fellowship many years ago. So I joined the University of Potsdam as a Marie Curie fellow, and I led a project called Memogram, so grammar and memory, evidence from a grammatic aphasia and probable Alzheimer's disease in German, Italian, and Greek. And I have published on aphasia, on post-stroke aphasia, on dementia of the Alzheimer type, and on multiple sclerosis. I'm talking about my first line of research only, which is relevant today. And currently in a study funded by the Cyprus University of Technology, my collaborators and I investigate the morphosyntactic, narrative, and cognitive abilities of Greek-speaking individuals with dementia of the Alzheimer type, individuals with mild cognitive impairment, and cognitively healthy controls. Mild cognitive impairment is a condition where people experience more memory or thinking problems than others their age, but this condition is not as severe as dementia. It's an intermediate stage between normal aging and dementia. Some people call it a prodromal stage of dementia. But not all people with mild cognitive impairment get dementia. Some people remain stable, while others may progress to dementia. So one of the goals of this study is to identify aspects of morphosyntactic and narrative production that can distinguish between healthy aging and mild cognitive impairment, and between mild cognitive impairment and dementia of the Alzheimer type. For instance, linguistic variables sensitive to brain pathology, such as Alzheimer's neuropathology, might include participants' level of accuracy performance on the production of grammatical aspect, mean length of utterance, and lexical diversity. This is just a possibility to give an example of what the results might look like. Interestingly, this project presents opportunities for synergies and collaboration with Dr. Georgiou. He's an expert in phonetics, as we saw. He can analyze different aspects of the speech signal, including segmental and suprasegmental features. And therefore, a collaboration with him would help expand the scope of the current project by considering not only language, but also speech variables. And importantly, it has been shown that speech variables are relevant and important not only in developmental language disorder, which has already been studied by Dr. Georgiou and Dr. Theodorou, but also it is relevant to mild cognitive impairment, for instance. For example, in their work on Swedish mild cognitive impairment, Charalampos Themistokleous and his colleagues found that some speech measures, including voice quality measures, can distinguish between individuals with mild cognitive impairment and cognitively healthy individuals. Therefore, considering speech measures along with morphosyntactic and narrative production measures could enable us to identify a cluster of speech and language features that could reliably detect abnormal or pathological cognitive decline. Moreover, collaborating with Dr. Georgiou could allow us to identify a cluster of morphosyntactic, narrative, and speech biomarkers associated with Alzheimer's neuropathology. And of course, the search for such biomarkers will be greatly enhanced by the use of machine learning algorithms or deep learning algorithms in data analysis. And as mentioned before, Dr. Georgiou is an expert in machine learning and deep learning. Moreover, identifying valid and reliable language and speech biomarkers of pathological cognitive decline or brain pathology could lead to the development of applications that support screening in clinical settings. And this is the translational aspect of this envisaged aspect. Such applications could facilitate early diagnosis, which is essential for the effective management of neurodegenerative diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease. And what is also, equally important is that it is plausible that certain aspects of language and speech may serve as preclinical markers of mild cognitive impairment or of dementia of the Alzheimer type or of Alzheimer's neuropathology. In other words, conditions such as Alzheimer's disease may impact language and speech before the onset of the symptoms, so before of mild cognitive impairment or dementia. So, a collaboration with Dr. Georgiou on the current project would provide an opportunity to investigate this possibility. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the next pitch.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Fyndanis. This is already quite exciting to see how synergies can be formed. And just looking at your list of potential collaborations, it seems like you've got about 6 projects lined up already, which is fantastic to hear. So now I'll invite Dr. Podina to do her presentation, and you can take it off from here. Ioana?
Hello to everyone. It's good to see you and good to be in front of you. I'm going to share my slides now, hopefully efficiently doing that. Can you see my slides? Not well, no.
No, yeah.
Oh, perfectly. So Valantis mentioned time, and I also believe that Georgiou mentioned time, but from a longitudinal perspective, this was also one of the focuses of my research, going a bit longitudinally on the data. My presentation is going to change a bit the recipe in the sense that I'm going to talk about mental health issues, but also bridging our discussion with neurological disorders. Brief introduction of mine. Hello, as mentioned, I'm Ioana Podina. I'm a YAE research fellow and head of the Laboratory of Cognitive Clinical Psychology from the University of Bucharest, Romania. Actually, I have seen some of my colleagues here from the laboratory, so a big hello to them as well. Now, in terms of my research, I'm first of all a clinical psychologist and cognitive psychologist. I work in digital mental health, and here by digital mental health, I mean any type of digital application, device, technology, which entails intervention, prevention, assessment, monitoring, and I have done it almost all in this perspective, having developed together with my colleagues gamified interventions for youth, mental health screening chatbots, and more recently, computational linguistics to track language patterns predictive of mental health issues. And here our particular focus was on depression and anxiety, which are quite common in day-to-day speech. So also one of my focuses is not necessarily only on the digital side of it, but also on the ethical side of it, in the sense that I'm concerned about the ethics of digital mental health tools and of emerging tools such as AI and machine learning and neurotechnologies, as in the case that we can see in front. Like, for instance, I had a recent mandate at UNESCO as an expert in the ethics of neurotechnologies, where we set forth several recommendations on the ethics of neurotechnologies, some of them concerning also mental health and neurological disorders. And I will mention them briefly at the end. I also have an issue with changing slides, but we will fix that. Now, in regards to one of the first studies that I want to present connected to this topic, one of these is concerns semantic pathologization. Now, here we were concerned with how mental health language evolves over time, and if there are cultural shifts in this terminology. studying words like depression and anxiety if they have evolved or devolved semantically across decades of text data. And in this respect, we have analyzed around 5 billion, not billion, million New York Times articles from the 70s up to our current daytime, 2023. And what we have stumbled upon is the fact that depression semantic severity increased over time. To some extent, we have expected it. What is semantic severity? First of all, a higher semantic severity indicates a word such as depression that appears in more intentional, emotionally intense and negative context. For instance, if depression frequently appears alongside words such as suicide, sufferance, severity, it is considered more semantically severe. We have noticed similar results in terms of other pathologies, such as trauma, for instance, anxiety, all considered today common pathologies, which are very frequent. Now, as it turns out, this is driven by the growing presence in mental health discourse, at least in terms of implications. Ordinary emotions as well, not only pathologies such as depressions, such as sadness, have been also increasingly used in public discussions such as those in New York Times in a clinical context. So what happens? We are using more and more terms such as depression and anxiety in clinical contexts when this isn't the case. And specifically, I'm talking about our day-to-day language. Now, the implications of our study, particularly and of this brief main result, is that we can notice cultural shifts. As I have mentioned, we have tracked this data up from the 70s, and we can notice cultural shifts in mental health discourse, how they actually change the semantic weight that we now give to mental health terminology, specifically in regards to anxiety and depression, but also noticed in other studies in regards to trauma, for instance. In this particular study, we have used analysis such as semantic severity analysis, word-to-vector models, and mental health index. This was one of the particular analysis. And in terms of implications of this paper, which is called From Normalization to Pathologization, a very suggestive title, we would say that this is in line with the prevalence inflation hypothesis. And for those that aren't familiar with it, this suggests that paradoxically, increased mental health awareness efforts, while well-intentioned, may be contributing to the rise of reported mental health issues. So that is obviously one of our presumptions for the reason for which depression and anxiety is used in day-to-day speech wrongfully and with a more severe connotation. And it might be one of the unintended consequences. And I myself, I am an advocate for mental health and for mental health awareness, but it might be one of the unexpected consequences of this mental health awareness effort. So this is up for debate, I know. I'm also, in terms of bridging this discussion towards collaboration, I'm also interested, why not if the same results also would render for neurological conditions? My presumption is that not, because they're not that specifically present in day-to-day use, and they haven't benefited from awareness efforts as common mental health issues have. So that would be quite an interesting study to do on neurological conditions, replicating what we have done here. So this is one of the studies that I wanted to present here. Another one is that on language biomarkers. Both studies share something. They look in time at the data, and they also share the fact that they have been done on natural discourse, that is day-to-day language, not in the lab particularly. That was particularly our interest. Here we wanted to detect emotional distress in real-world communication, and specifically in social media communication, using Reddit as an outlet for this. And what better population to do that together with, not on, but together with, than cancer survivors in terms of emotional distress. They actually obviously experience a lot of emotional distress alongside their diagnosis. And what we wanted to do is actually track in time their speech on their text on Reddit and see if we can track disease stages throughout language evolution. We wanted to see if there are changes in pattern in how they use terms with reference to anxiety, depression, if they actually change in time. Obviously, being diagnosed with cancer is a huge trigger of mental health, and we have several other studies to prove that, not only those on computational linguistics. We use for this particular study computational linguistics to see if we can see these language patterns. This is a particularly different study in the sense that we have contacted, not just extracted the text, but contacted the Reddit users, analyzed it on around 73,000 posts. We had their agreement to participate in the study, and all of them were cancer survivors whose texts were analyzed at different cancer survivorship stages, such as from early diagnosis to late, from early diagnosis and early survivorship to long-term survivorship. So this is very important. And what we found is that recently diagnosed individuals, so those that have around 2 years from diagnosis, used more depression and anxiety-loaded language in their Reddit chats. To mention here, the Reddit posts weren't dedicated to cancer specifically. And crucially, their discourse was qualitatively different from their long-term peers, long-term survivors, who shifted their discourse not towards treatment and symptoms, but towards life adaptation and supporting others. And as expected, long-term survivors had less depression and anxiety-loaded language in their posts. So that is one of the interesting results that we have here. And one of the implications is that the natural language that they use on Reddit seems to be distally reflecting disease stages. And by disease stages, I mean, I'm tracking mental health, anxiety, and depression here, suggesting that language biomarkers could actually track not just illness presence, but also illness trajectories. And there's a whole bunch of literature we are suggesting, but there's a whole bunch of literature on this, particularly focused on this particular question, as also Georgiou has mentioned. For this particular study, we have used BERT classifications, lexicon-based analysis, specialized lexicons for cancer terminology, topic modeling to see common themes in between our participants, and sentiment analysis. Both papers are available open access to be further approached in depth by those interested. And what we were particularly interested in this paper, and what I believe is the plus value of it outside of the results, is that we have actually is the authenticity of the data. We know that Reddit is a platform that is quite different from Facebook, for instance, or Instagram, especially because of ensuring privacy. And also, this type of results set the stage for Reddit to become a platform, not just for chatting, but also for identifying the individuals at risk for mental health issues. And in particular regard to this paper, we believe that special attention should be given to the mental health of short-term survivors. Now, bridging a bit the discussion with neurological conditions in the time that I have left, first of all, how does the state of affairs look in terms of mental health? Now, crossing the borders from my research and moving on to other types of research. First of all, language biomarkers for depression, anxiety seem to be achieving around 7 to 85% accuracy. These are the best ones for individual detection, but for individual condition detection, but they do struggle when it comes to differential diagnosis, such as diagnosing the difference between anxiety and depression, because they're highly comorbid, for instance. So in this respect, they also have positive and negative rates that are quite high, up to 30%, false positive and false negative rates. And obviously, we can't talk about a diagnosis value yet. We can talk about maybe reliable usage for screening and monitoring. Now, another aspect here, bridging the discussion with neurological conditions, is that depression and anxiety, for instance, language biomarkers show slightly better raw accuracy, but higher variability and false positive rates compared to neurological conditions, for instance. Both achieve similar world performance to say around 65–75% accuracy, and obviously face comparable challenges when it comes to differential diagnosis, distinguishing in between comorbidities, for instance. But given that we have multiple more people affected by depression and anxiety, there is a huge interest in these common pathologies, and not only,